If you clicked on this video, you know how destructive binge eating can be on your well-being and potential. At one point, I weighed over 300 pounds and I had to deal with binge eating. Over just the past 3 years, I was able to manage everything. So I lost about 110 pounds, and I was thinking about the most foolproof methods that worked for me and worked more often over time. I have no doubt in my mind that if you follow these tips, that you can mimic my results. I would try your best to stick to the end of the video because the things that I'm going to talk about work best in tandem with each other, and I don't want you to miss out on potential months or years of lost progress. So I'm going to start with more mindset-oriented methods and then transition into more practical ways. Number 1 is mindfulness. The first method to practice is to consciously tell yourself, I feel like binge eating, when you feel like binge eating. And once that happens and you've made that conscious thought, try your best to observe that thought without any judgment or reassurance. Then you have to consciously note what sparked that feeling. So what negative emotion, whether that be stress, anxiety, or what have you. When you're first starting off, you have to be very forgiving with yourself because binge eating is incredibly hard to overcome, let alone have any sort of control over. So it requires practice over time. If you're able to label these two things without judgment, then you are making incredible progress regardless if you actually follow through with the binge eating. What you're doing when you label these thoughts and the cause is you are practicing detachment from your impulses and the stimuli. Your higher self, or like the person you want to be, doesn't want to binge eat. The thing that wants to binge eat is the primitive part of your brain. But that primitive part of your brain that wants to cope with stress was, engineered for a way different time, like back when we were fighting lions and shit. So the most important thing to learn when you become mindful is that the observer of the thoughts and emotions is the real you, not the being feeling them. You are not actually saving yourself from any present danger. The hardest part of binge eating is the lack of control you feel. And this understanding makes it easier to ground yourself to assess the situation for what it really is. I'm going to go further into the list, but if you take the time to watch my video where I talk about my weight loss story, I talk about how when I meditated, I would view the itches that I felt on my body and sit there and observe them. And this is a great method. It's sort of like mental push-ups to deal with much larger moments of impulse, like binge eating. The second thing is to define who you want to be and claim that as truth. So when you want to become anything, like the best thing to do is just to believe that you already are that thing. If you want to be someone who has a great work ethic, you don't say, I'm trying to become someone who has a great work ethic. You have to label yourself as someone with a great work ethic. When you reframe situations like this, you are reprogramming the way you think and operate in a much stronger way. By identifying yourself as someone who is trying to become healthy versus someone who is healthy, you are giving away so much power because already you're saying that I'm not this person. So, there's a much bigger chance of failure. They're like, you're introducing overthinking and you're giving away power. By claiming it as an individual, you gain a lot of power over your habits moving forward. You sort of create cornerstones of operation around a solid identity over time. And by doing this, you remove the need of motivation and willpower because this is just who you are. The third method is making an environment that reinforces that new identity and creates an environment that's scarce for binge eating. One of the most important things to do regarding eating less or preventing binge eating is just make it hard as possible to eat your binge food. If you live in a college dorm, for example, I talked about in my videos that I didn't keep any snacks in my room except for like a protein bar or two just in case. And otherwise, I just made it super hard to go get food because otherwise I'd have to walk or drive somewhere. Essentially, you just have to make it as hard as possible to gain access to the food that you want to eat. And I know for a lot of us, we don't care if we have to go get up and drive, but otherwise making this change in your immediate environment makes a huge difference. The fourth method is to make sure that your diet is regular and happens basically on a schedule. So if you eat your food in a timely manner and your food is nutritious, then your feelings of hunger won't vary through the day, and over time you'll get used to when you feel hungry at certain points. So by recognizing small hunger pangs, you won't feel the need to label that as a need to binge eat. So what I found most helpful for me is when I ate a breakfast that consisted of high protein and high fat. If I did eat breakfast, normally I would intermittent fast until noon every day. If I had a breakfast that had a lot of carbs in it, my anxiety would always be high throughout the day. So something about carbs in a breakfast, I don't know if that's just me, but whenever I had any sort of carbs, I would just be anxious, and that would make me eat a bunch later. I would cut back on caffeine. In my video where I talked about supplementary foods, whether that be snacks or meal replacements, I talked about how important or how useful energy drinks can be, or just caffeine in general, because caffeine is an appetite suppressant. If you do drink caffeine, you need to eat it with food, because if you don't, the chances of you getting shaky are super high, and for the most part, you need to eat food to stop the jitteriness. Nothing bad is going to happen, obviously, if you're eating enough calories and macronutrients, but if you mistime your caffeine consumption, you're not going to feel good. Always try to time your caffeine with food. And the most important tip is to not eat sugar. Blood sugar levels fluctuating throughout the day had a huge effect on my mood and appetite personally, and I would only imagine that that's sort of a universal experience. And when you remove sugar from your diet and you're mostly focusing on protein and fat, your mood is so stabilized throughout the day, and so is your appetite. Knowing that you had a steady diet of enough calories and macronutrients is the number one means of deflecting binge eating thoughts of, I need to eat, I'm starving, I didn't have enough. Knowing these things on top of the environment, on top of the mindfulness, will give you a lot of means to understand what exactly is happening and why you do not need to actually act on your impulses of binge eating. The last method was not saved for last because it's the least effective, but it requires a lot of money for the most part. The fifth method is therapy. So I know a lot of us can't afford it, but if you do have access to therapy, I would really take advantage of it. If you're in college, chances are counseling sessions are included in your tuition. So I would go ahead and get your money's worth. I only went my last 2 years of college, and that was mostly pride because I didn't think that I needed it. But if I can go back and do it all over again, I would start my first appointment like in orientation week. For a lot of us, binge eating comes as a coping mechanism from events from childhood, traumatic or otherwise. Untangling these events and working through them will change your life. I thought I was like 95% fine going into my first session, but after 2 whole years of going, I realized that who I was needed the wake-up call and the assistance more than anything. There's so much we don't know about mental health, and there is no shame in seeking help whatsoever, especially in today's age. Going to therapy or counseling will not only help you work through your binge eating, but other conscious or unconscious issues that are affecting you, whether you know it or not. If you can't afford therapy, I might make a video in the future where I can talk about some of the practices that I do when I feel the need to work through certain emotions or impulses. But I just want to make clear that I'm not a therapist or a psychologist. So I would recommend that you seek professional advice before you act on the stories and the advice that I can offer up. The best thing I can do right now is to recommend that you guys watch the video that I just made on maturing out. And I'll put a card in the video so you can click on that and watch. So I really appreciate your time. Please let me know if you tried any of these things and if they were helpful at all. If you wouldn't mind sharing and liking this video so others can get to learn something from it, that would be awesome. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can see more videos like this in the future. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one.